Hey, how's it going, guys? Domino Paris 21 here, and back again to bring you guys another episode of Meta Talk. Now, of course, as you see here for this episode, I'm going to be doing my own analysis on Amon Reverse. Definitely a deck that I've been looking forward to for some time for set 12, because as some of you guys may know, Dark Irregulars is definitely one of my favorite clans to play. I very thoroughly enjoy playing this clan, so finally seeing them getting some nice support from set 12 definitely brings some new life to Dark Irregulars. Now, of course, the question is, well, with a new support from set 12 for DIs, can Dark Irregulars be that top tier competitive deck? Well, that's what we're here to talk about, so let's actually get started. Now, a couple things to actually address before we actually get into the analysis of the deck. The build I'm mainly going to be talking about for Amon Reverse is particularly the build that I am playing, which is the Cross Ride variant, where you kind of just mainly focus on just running regular Amons and Amon Reverse just to get a consistent cross ride, and essentially the playstyle of the deck is more of a controlled pressure version as opposed to like a version with break rides and such. Now, I know there's different variants and directions you can go about with the Amon Reverse deck, but me personally, I say the traditional cross ride version for Reverse and playing a more pressure control style of play, it's really the best way to actually play Amon Reverse, especially to combat the meta. So I'm going to be basing the analysis based on that. So you'll see some key cards that are actually used for this style of play. So first off, first category we're going to be talking about is pressure. How well does this deck pressure your opponent? Well, when it comes to Dark Irregulars, of course, one of their main iconic traits is basically around their center line, their main Vanguard column. Now, of course, going back to set 3, where Dark Irregulars were first introduced, of course you have your regular Amon, where regular Amon, his skill reads, during your turn, he gains plus 1,000 power for every card in Soul. So, of course, Dark Irregulars being the aggressively soul charging deck as they are, towards the late stages of the game, the Soul can definitely tend to build up to hit some pretty high numbers with Amon. Now, of course, with the addition of Amon Reverse, he does essentially inherit the same skill as the original Amon, but the difference is, of course, he does have the extra crit. So now, while him getting that extra crit is a limit break, and you do have to lock one, which can be somewhat of a limitation, but the fact is that he gains the extra crit can definitely make a key difference to how much pressure your center Vanguard has now. So with that extra crit, as I always say, you know, any Vanguards that can carry extra crits always is going to bring some kind of pressure to your opponent, because of course, you know, if your opponent no guards Vanguard with an extra crit, it could potentially mean the end of the game to your opponent. So really the best way to actually play with that is to obviously have your opponent at 3 damage, pressure them at 3 damage to keep them away from limit break and forcing them to either, you know, drop perfect guards early on or drop extra shield early on against it. And then when you're ready, you can start like forcing yourself in and just start making big pushes that the deck is very capable of. So the main pressure, of course, from this deck comes from its center line. Now, of course, with Dark Irregulars, they do have ways to hit some big numbers, and of course, you do that with one of my very favorite cards in the game, Doreen the Thruster. She did increase in price, you know, after quite some time, which is very interesting. But with Doreen the Thruster, of course, if you guys don't know what she does, every time you soul charge one unit, she gains +3, so of course it can stack. Now, it is arguable as to whether Doreen is really honestly ideal in Dark Irregulars or not, but what's nice with Doreen is she can add some extra pressure that can potentially close out some games, especially around the late stage of the game. Because once you wear your opponent out, you know, with your Amon Reverse column, you can start exploding with your Doreen the Thruster. And granted, of course, you know, with Amon's follower support, you have like the Hell's Draw, or excuse me, Hell's Deal, that particular one, Hell's Draw, and Hysteric Shirley's. These are nice, easy ways to get some double soul charges, get Doreen to that at least 12k base power, so she can really start hitting some really big numbers. So really good closeout games. Now, in terms of overall pressure throughout the whole game, you know, granted, like I said, Amon Reverse really starts his pressure when you have limit break. So you may have to wait a little bit to start really pressuring your opponent. Around the early stage of the game, this deck doesn't really have any access to anything to really force out your opponent's hand necessarily, and there's really no units here that have like on-hit abilities that may cause some consequences for your opponent. So the pressure really does fall around mid to late game. So, but nonetheless, you know, like I said, once your opponent gets worn out of perfect guards and precious shields in their hand, it's, I mean, a huge middle column with an extra crit could be very devastating. Backed by a few Doreen pump columns, could definitely scream defeat for your opponent. So, overall for pressure, I'm gonna give this deck a 4.5 out of 5, strictly because, like I said, a huge middle column with a crit constantly every turn is very pressuring enough as it is. So moving on to the next category, which we're going to talk about advantage. Now, unfortunately for advantage, there's really not much to talk about for DIs, kind of like similar with what I say about Spike Brothers. Because Dark Irregulars, they're just made to be a very offensive deck, and like the fact, and you know, what I always say with Dark Irregulars is they could definitely use some new support that can allow them to maybe replenish cards in their hand or draw cards, but this deck has little to absolutely no access to producing direct advantage for themselves. It would be nice, you know, maybe if they had like a Luckbird clone, or maybe like a certain unit where, I don't know, like where you place it, a unit of a certain name, like if you place it on your field, if you have a copy of it in Soul, you can like Soul Blast and draw a card or something. That would be really nice. But essentially for this deck, especially with the playstyle of my particular build, it kind of plays just how, you know, a traditional Kagero deck did with Dragonic Overlord the N, where essentially you sit on a 13k body, which is definitely huge for Dark Irregulars since, you know, Amon was very frail and the deck doesn't produce advantage for itself, so it's really hard defensively. So having a 13k body is really good to help conserve some extra shield, make it easier for you to guard. But on top of that, excuse me guys, you also have access to removal cards, such as Bloody Calf and Gwyn, which I do run in my decks, which are Berserk Dragons. So sitting on a 13k body while having constant sniping at your opponent's key boosters to you know, effectively take on a 13k cross rod, very effective. Can help you conserve cards in hands, and like I say, what's nice with him on reverse is this deck is not dependent on counterblast, so you have so much flexibility to actually finally use these cards, which are really fantastic cards. So you're essentially taking the Kagero approach in terms of creating your advantage by, you know, creating lots of pressure on your opponent to essentially kind of, you know, force out more cards from his hand than you are, and, you know, you using your removal cards to help, you know, just to help sustain your opponent's field presence to help conserve your shield. But in terms of direct advantage, they don't produce anything for themselves, so there's really not much more to it. So overall for card advantage, I'm going to give this deck a 3 out of 5. So I think that's a good fair rating. And then last but not least is consistency. How consistent is this deck? Well, when it comes to consistency, this deck is very simple. It's a very simple strategy. Try to get your cross ride and get your 6 soul, swing with crits, simple as that, and then late game, push with Doreen. So it's very simple. This deck doesn't necessarily rely on certain cards necessarily. Now what's nice is, of course, you know, if you miss your Amon cross ride, well, one, you have your starter Devil and Shadow, which, I mean, every deck has access to this, but it's a grade 3 searcher, help get your cross ride. And of course, with the aggressive soul charging this deck is capable of, you can easily soul charge the Amon. So hitting a 13k body is definitely not too bad. And the deck, like I said, is very simple. Just get 6 soul. Get 6 in soul, and then just remove any key units with any removal cards with Gwyns and Bloody Calves. And then, although Doreen is really good to help close out games, she's not as essential to the deck, but nonetheless, you'll draw her eventually when you need to, because you don't have to rely on drawing her like early as possible. So you can always get her later to make those pushes. And of course, with Amon's followers, they have a lot of double soul charging units, which is really nice. You know, Hell's Deal and Hell's Draw. I'm trying to find one for you guys. Sorry, I'm a little. I thought it was a little more organized. So yeah, it's very easy to get the 6 soul, and really for this deck, all you really need to do is hit the 6 or 8 soul mark. I mean, you're going to be able to hit some pretty fantastic numbers, and most likely you're going to be baiting out perfect guards early on anyway, so the soul will build up till late game. So like I said, the deck is very simple. It's built to be very simple, very simple and very consistent. I mean, you know, the simpler the deck strategy, the more consistent it will be. So overall for consistency, although sometimes you know, you may not always get your you know, your Hell's cards, the double soul chargers in time, eventually you will. And I mean, the deck will definitely definitely have its main 6 soul for reverse to finally start pressuring with crits. Now, in terms of how effective the strategy is, it's not always as foolproof as we think. You know, in a perfect world, you know, we would like to think that our deck will run exactly the way we want it to, but sometimes our strategy kind of falls apart, such as maybe our opponent sacks triggers early on, or or builds up a huge hand advantage. You're not gonna. That's just extra turns your opponent's gonna last against the extra crit, and in the meantime, your opponent may be pressuring, maybe putting pressure on you. So which you know, like I say with Dark Irregulars, they have a lot of time, you know, holding up defensively, and also at the same time, you know, Dark Irregulars kind of are field reliant. You do need to try to maintain a nice, decent, ideal offensive field and presence to be able to also, you know, combat your opponent's rear guards, or just continue applying pressure at your opponent while you know, pushing them in with your center line. So you still need to have a good ideal field to back up your Vanguard. So there can be some breaks from time to time when it comes to just ideally drawing the right cards just to maintain good field presence. But overall, I say for consistency, I'll definitely give this deck a 4 out of 5. The main strategy of the deck is very simple, but very effective. And I mean, as long as you draw decent, which I mean, it goes the same for most decks, the deck strategy will definitely work well for you. Well, there you have it, guys. That is my meta talk video for you guys. As always, leave a comment down below. For any fellow Dark Irregular players out there, feel free to leave a comment down below and let me know what you guys think. And also leave a thumbs up to this video. That's always greatly appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Well, other than that, guys, thanks again for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Later.